Welcome back to Sir Aldred of Gallowmere Part 3. The path to the barrow twisted unnaturally, as if the land itself sought to turn them away. Aldred's boots sank into the damp earth. Each step met with the sucking pull of the mire. Harold followed close behind, his breath shallow, his eyes darting to every shadowed hollow between the trees. The wind carried no birdsong, no rustling of leaves, only the sound of their own movement, thick and sluggish in the still air. Aldred tightened his grip on his sword. It was too quiet. Then from somewhere ahead a sound. Not the whispering from before, not the Mirewraith's voice slithering through the trees. This was different. A scraping like something heavy being dragged over stone. Harold's hand shot to his dagger. What devilry! Aldred raised a hand for silence. The sound grew closer. Scrape, scrape. Aldred turned his head slowly. Something was coming. Then a break in the trees, and there it stood. A man, or what had once been one. His skin hung loose, mottled with decay, his limbs bent at angles that should not be. But it was his face that sent ice lancing through Aldred's veins. For he knew that face, Sir Oswin. The name left his lips before he could stop it. Harold's breath caught. Oswin? But Aldred barely heard him. Oswin had been one of the king's finest knights, a man of unshakable honour. He had vanished 2 years prior while on a pilgrimage to the north. And yet here he was, or at least what remained of him. Oswin's jaw hung open, his eyes black pits of hunger. Scrape, scrape. Aldred's gaze dropped. The knight dragged something behind him. A great sword chipped and rusted, its edge slick with something dark. Sir Oswin, Aldred said again, more forcefully this time. What art thou? The thing that had been Oswin cocked its head. Then it moved, faster than anything that broken should be. Aldred barely raised his sword in time. Steel met steel, the force of the blow sending him staggering. Oswin struck again and again. Aldred's arms burned. The strength behind each strike was inhuman, relentless. Oswin fought with the precision of a knight, and the fury of a thing that did not tire. Harold lunged, dagger flashing. The blade found purchase in Oswin's side, yet he did not flinch. Instead he turned, and Harold froze. For a moment neither moved. Then Oswin spoke. A voice like wind through hollow bones, like grave dirt slipping between fingers. Thou art unworthy, he swung. Aldred barely tackled Harold out of the way. The greatsword crashed down where the squire had stood, splitting the earth. Aldred rolled to his feet, dragging Harold with him. Run! Harold did not argue. They fled, crashing through the undergrowth, their breath ragged. Oswin's footsteps thundered behind them, closer with each passing second. The trees blurred. Aldred's mind raced. Oswin was not a phantom, nor a mere corpse risen from the grave. No, he remembered, he had spoken. Judged, which meant Harold. Aldred called. The symbol on his chest, didst thou see it? Harold gasped between breaths. Aye, a black mark like roots. The Mirewraith's mark. Aldred's stomach clenched. Oswin had bargained with it once, as he had. And now the knight was neither living nor dead, only claimed, a fate that awaited Aldred should he fail. The thought sent fire through his limbs. He could not outrun Oswin, but perhaps a clearing loomed ahead. Aldred pivoted, dragging Harold with him. The trees broke, and the ground fell away. Harold screamed. They tumbled down a sharp incline, bodies colliding with roots and stones. The air rushed past them, then suddenly stopped. Aldred hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Distantly he heard Harold groan. Then silence. Aldred blinked against the dust. His head throbbed, his limbs ached. Slowly he pushed himself upright. They had landed in a shallow hollow, surrounded by jagged rocks. Above, the trees swayed, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Oswin did not follow. Aldred frowned, glancing up. The knight stood at the edge of the ridge, great sword hanging loosely at his side. He did not move, did not speak, only watched. Aldred's pulse hammered. Harold sat up, wincing. Dost thou think? He cannot follow. Aldred's lips parted to answer, then slowly Oswin knelt. The motion was deliberate, almost reverent. He placed the greatsword before him, hands resting on the pommel. and then he bowed his head. Aldred's breath caught. Harold swallowed. Why did he? A gust of wind cut him off. Low, hollow. From behind Aldred turned, and his stomach dropped. For there, nestled within the rock, carved into the very bones of the earth, was a doorway. A great arch of stone blackened with age, its surface slick with moss. Symbols ancient and unreadable curled along its edges, twisting like veins. It yawned open before them, leading into a darkness deeper than the grave. Harold shuddered. The barrow. Aldred exhaled slowly. Oswin did not chase them, for he did not need to. He had driven them exactly where they were meant to go. Aldred turned back to the ridge. Oswin watched. And as the wind stirred the trees once more, his voice came again, soft. Barely a whisper. Enter. Aldred shivered. Harold gripped his arm. Aldred. Dost thou feel it? Aldred did. The pull, like hands unseen and insistent, curling into his chest, drawing him forward. He had no choice now. The barrow awaited. The barrow swallowed them whole. Darkness wrapped around Aldred and Harold like a second skin, thick and unyielding. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth long undisturbed. Their footsteps echoed against stone, the sound too loud in the pressing silence. Harold swallowed hard. This place, it doth feel as a tomb. Sir Aldred nodded, though he did not speak. The corridor sloped downward, the ceiling narrowing with each step. Strange symbols lined the walls, their carvings deep, jagged, like something had scratched them there, desperate to leave a mark before vanishing into the abyss. Aldred ran a gloved hand over the stone. The grooves were uneven, filled with something dark and brittle. Not moss, not dirt, something else. A whisper stirred the air, not words. Not sound, a feeling, a weight settling over his chest. The path opened into a cavernous chamber, the ceiling lost to shadow. Torches lined the walls, unlit, yet the air hummed with something ancient. Aldred stepped forward, his boots scuffing against something hard. He glanced down. Bones, scattered in brittle heaps, blackened with age, some human, some not. Harold exhaled sharply. What manner of place is this? Aldred did not answer, for his gaze had fallen upon the thing at the centre of the chamber. A stone throne, cracked with time, roots curling around its base like gnarled fingers. Upon it sat a figure, its form shrouded in shadow, its face obscured beneath a great hood. It did not move, yet Aldred felt its eyes upon him. Then a rasping breath. Aldred's pulse thundered. The figure shifted. Harold stumbled back, his dagger raised. What devilry! The figure lifted its head. And Aldred froze. A face, pale as death, gaunt, its skin stretched thin over sharp bones, lips cracked with age, eyes black as the abyss. Yet despite the rot, the ruin, he knew that face. Father. The whisper left him unbidden. Harold stiffened beside him. Thy father? The figure smiled, a slow, terrible thing. Aldred's mouth went dry. His father had died. Years ago, torn apart by the brigands who had slaughtered his household. And yet here he was, son, the figure rasped. Thou hast come at last. Aldred's breath shuddered. What sorcery is this? His father, or what wore his father's face, tilted his head. Sorcery, nay, my child, only fate. The torches flared to life, bathing the chamber in flickering gold. Shadows stretched long across the walls, twisting like living things. Aldred's hands clenched. What art thou? The thing on the throne chuckled. I am what remains, what lingers, what the Mirewraith did not take. The name sent ice through Aldred's veins. The Mirewraith, a spirit of barter and ruin, of promises never fulfilled. A thing that bound men to its will with whispered bargains, claiming their souls in pieces until nothing remained. And now Aldred saw the truth. His father had made a bargain, and lost. Harold took a shaky step forward. Why dost thou still linger? The wraith should have taken thee wholly. The smile widened, revealing teeth blackened with rot. It would have, but I paid the price in blood not my own. Aldred's stomach turned. His father had made an exchange, his life for another's, and now Aldred stood before the consequence. A consequence that now looked upon him with hunger. The figure leaned forward. Thou art the final piece, Aldred. Aldred's grip tightened on his sword. I am no man's bargain. The torches shuddered, the figure laughed. Art thou not? The cavern walls groaned. Shadows bled from the stone, curling around the throne's base. Aldred took a step back. The shadows moved. Shapes stirred within them, figures half-formed, faces twisted in agony, hands reaching, clawing. Harold gasped. Spirits. Aldred understood. These were the others, the ones his father had traded away, the ones the Mirewraith had claimed. And now it sought to complete its collection. Aldred's breath came fast. I shall not yield to thee. His father, no, the thing that wore his face, sighed. Ah, my son, that choice was made long ago. The shadows lunged. Aldred moved. His sword sang, slicing through the dark. The spirits shrieked, recoiling like wounded beasts. Harold drew his dagger, his voice tight. We must flee. Aldred knew it to be true. But his father, he turned back and froze. The figure on the throne was rising, limbs unfolding, body stretching beyond human form. The cloak fell away, revealing a grotesque mass of bone and sinew, its torso splitting open like a gaping maw. A voice like shattered glass scraped against his ears. Thou art mine, Aldred. Then the shadows swallowed the light, the torches died. Darkness consumed the chamber, and Aldred fell. Darkness held him. It was not the absence of light, nor the shadow of nightfall. It was something thicker, something that pressed against his skin like damp wool, cloying, suffocating. A weight settled on his chest, and for a moment Aldred thought he had fallen into the grave itself. Then a voice, low, whispering, crawling into his ears like insects beneath the skin. Thou art bound, Aldred. The pact is sealed. He tried to move. His limbs felt slow, his muscles heavy, as though his very blood had thickened to sludge. The air was damp, the scent of old earth and something rotting filling his nostrils. A spark of light flared in the distance. Aldred turned his head, though the action was sluggish, as if he moved through tar. A figure stood beyond the murk, its form hunched and twisted, long fingers curling around a staff of blackened wood. Harold. No, not Harold. The Mirewraith. Aldred's breath came fast. What hast thou done? The creature tilted its head, its face obscured beneath a veil of shifting shadows. What was always meant to be? Aldred fought against the weight that held him down, his muscles screaming in protest. I hath agreed to no bargain. The wraith chuckled, a sound like dried leaves crumbling to dust. Thy father's debt is thine, blood for blood, name for name. Aldred's jaw clenched. His father had made the pact, had betrayed others to save himself. And now the wraith sought to collect its due. His due, but Aldred was no man's pawn. With a raw snarl, he wrenched himself forward, the air thick like unseen chains holding him back. His hand found the hilt of his sword, fingers tightening around the leather grip. The Mirewraith did not move. Thou canst not fight fate, child. Aldred's blade sang through the air, but the strike meant nothing. The creature dissolved into shadow, the form unraveling like mist before dawn. A whisper coiled around his ear. Thou canst not escape me. Then Aldred's footing gave way. He plunged downward, the world tilting, air rushing past him. His stomach lurched, his limbs flailing as the void swallowed him whole. Then stone cold, unyielding. Aldred hit the ground hard, the impact jarring his bones. The air left his lungs in a harsh gasp, pain flaring along his ribs. Somewhere above, the wraith's laughter echoed, fading into silence. Then torches blazed to life. Aldred blinked against the sudden glow, his vision swimming. He was in a chamber, the walls lined with carvings that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The symbols, twisting, writhing, were the same as those he had seen before, but now they seemed to breathe, shifting as though alive. A sound, soft, rhythmic, reached his ears. Heartbeat, not his own. Aldred pushed himself up, wincing as his joints protested. His fingers found his sword, still clutched in his grip. Then a whisper, not from the walls, not from the wraith, from the far end of the chamber. Aldred turned and froze. A figure knelt before an altar, its head bowed, arms bound in iron shackles. A hood obscured its face, but the robes, tattered, stained with old blood, bore the crest of Gallowmere. Aldred's heart pounded. A prisoner, a survivor, the final piece of his father's bargain. Slowly he stepped forward. The stone beneath his boots felt wrong, humming with something unseen. He reached out, fingers brushing fabric. The figure shuddered. Then it looked up. Aldred staggered back, breath catching in his throat. It was a man, or what remained of one. His face was sunken, his skin stretched taut over bone, eyes blackened pits where life once lingered. His lips trembled, a hoarse whisper escaping them. Aldred. Aldred knew that voice, knew it well, Sir Edric. His father's right hand, the man who had once stood beside him in battle, the man who had vanished years ago. The prisoner's eyes flickered, something desperate beneath the decay. Thou must break the cycle, Aldred swallowed. What cycle? Edric shook his head, chains rattling. The pact, the curse, it doth feed upon our line ever hungry. Aldred's fingers curled into a fist. And if I refuse? Edric's expression darkened. The wraith shall take thee, nor thou hast ever loved. Aldred's stomach twisted. This was never about him alone. The wraith wanted everything. His name, his honor, his very soul. And unless he ended this, it would never stop. Edric's voice wavered. There is but one way to break the chain. Aldred exhaled slowly. Tell me. Adric's gaze flickered to the altar. Aldred followed his stare, and his blood turned to ice. There, resting atop the stone slab, was a dagger. Old, ornate, the hilt carved from obsidian, the blade gleaming with an eerie light. Runes lined its surface, pulsing in time with the heartbeat that filled the chamber. Aldred knew what it was, the death blade, a weapon of finality, of severance, the only thing that could truly end a pact with the Mirewraith. Edric's voice was barely above a whisper. One must die. The words struck like a hammer. Aldred stared at the dagger. The weight of the moment crushed him. The path was clear, but the cost. Could he pay it? His breath shuddered. Then a choice was made. End of part 3 of Sir Aldred of Gallowmere. Thanks for listening. Please support with a like and subscribe or a share.
Another tale from TripplEXreader. Sir Aldred of Gallowmere. What tales we shall again inquire. We follow tune to man's desire.